Okay. Yeah, so you really got that happening.
I think I know the answer to this guy's question, this French guy, because I ran into it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the way.
Dogs?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Scott Roberts here with Jerry Hubbell and Kent Marts, and you are at the OpenGOTO Community Live program, episode 14. So glad to have you guys here with us today. I see that Mike Wiesner's joined us again. Thanks for being a regular, Mike. That's awesome. Jay Murphy, here's the dogs. Daniel Wynn says hi from Doylestown, Ohio. Peter Visima is here from Toronto, Canada, and Dusty Haskins. Hey, everybody. Glad to have you on board with us today. Bergman Scooter, thanks for chiming in at the beginning of the show. It's awesome. Anyhow, Mike Wiesner says, yesterday I suggested to someone to check out the PMC-Eight mounts. He did, and he ordered a PMC-Eight G11. Wow. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. Jay Murphy says hello to everybody. Okay, well, let's get started with some of our topics today. We have had a number of people ask us how to connect Stellarium to the PMC-Eight. And so we started down that path today, and we're going to do part one of doing that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jerry.
Yeah, so I had tried Stellarium almost 3 years ago when we first released the Explore Stars, and I messed with it. And there was Stellarium, and then you had to use an in-between software called Stellarium Scope to get it to work. And then recently, it's been 2-3 years, and recently some customers have been saying that the connection, the AskHum Driver or server connection, is actually inside Stellarium now. So I went out and tried to find it. And the other thing that got me interested is we've got this new user from France. His name's Alpine. That's his email anyway. And he sent this message in French to me, and I translated it with Google. And he says he's having problems with Stellarium doesn't work, which tells me that it's impossible to point a telescope in position of parking. So I think, and I ran into this, what he's saying is that when you bring up Stellarium and you try to go to an object, it won't move because it says it's in park, and there's no way to unpark it in Stellarium. So I'm going to go over what you need to do in Stellarium to make that work. So the first thing I had to do is go out and find this program. And so I found this fellow on Cloudy Nights, and some of you may already be familiar. He released a version of Stellarium back in October that uses that's got the AskHum support built in, and that's what I was looking for. And I think that's what everybody's been using. Now this is back. There's a lot of messages here, but on his first message, he says, go to this Google Drive and download the Stellarium version that he's got. And I went ahead and did that. And
hey, Jerry, what thread is that real quick? Show everybody where that thread is.
Okay, so
or maybe post a link in the comments.
Yeah, let me do that.
Kept simulcasting right now, so you're gonna have to post it in about 4 different places.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the chat window on Skype, and then you can type it. You can copy it from there.
Okay, I'll do that.
All right, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's where I found it and downloaded it and installed it. And I had to go through some things to do that. But I'll go over tomorrow. We'll go into detail on how to install it tomorrow. But I want to show you how it's connected up right today. So I'm going to start it up.
So to be clear, if you go to the Stellarium website, the Foundry or GitHub or wherever lives, this is not that.
This is not that, but I loaded that first one. I went to get the latest version of Stellarium thinking it was going to be in there, but I couldn't find it. It may be in there. I just couldn't figure out how to configure it to show up. But then I found this one, and I went through and did the configuration and figured out how to get it turned on. So it very well could be in the release version that's available now on the Stellarium website. So one thing is, so this is at Earth. Right now this is showing Earth, so let me get it back to the correct location. So I'm going to put this in as Spring, Arkansas. Okay, that's where the
Explorer Scientific is located.
That's where we're located, and the place is Fayetteville is the closest place. I'm just going to use that. Okay. And then I'm going to go to the telescope settings. All right. And configure. And what you have to do is, let me disconnect. I'm going to do this from scratch. I'm going to remove this one. So once you get the telescope thing turned on, I think it's under, let me show you where that is. I think if I can remember, I just did this today. Configuration window. I think if you go to tools, is that right? Plugins. You scroll down, telescope control. All right, there's a thing here that says, this is how you turn it on. I hit this configure and couldn't get it to come up, but if you turn this on, you see this little checkbox here to start up, to load it startup, then it will show up down here in your taskbar. See that icon? The little telescope icon.
Yeah.
That'll show up in your little toolbar. So you hit that and you get this, and then now you want to configure. You need to add a driver. So you go add telescope, new telescope. I'm going to call it IXOS 100 PMC-Eight. All right, and then you'll come down here. And device is, I thought it was here, AskHum. Oh, here it is, right here. You select AskHum right here. Okay, and then you hit choose telescope, and this will come up to the familiar chooser. And what you're going to choose, you're not going to choose the PMC-Eight telescope. You're going to use the POTH hub. That's the trick to getting access to be able to unpark and park and turn tracking on and off.
And this is the place where a lot of people get confused because they're thinking PMC-Eight, but we're connecting the planetarium program to the POTH hub, and you connect the PMC-Eight to the POTH hub using
Right,
the
so
AskHum Driver.
Right. So the POTH hub is like a dispatcher. It allows you to have multiple clients connect to the PMC-Eight, and it marshals all the information, all the communications that goes back and forth between the PMC-Eight and all the different clients. It manages that. So you'll go back here and look at the properties and go to setup, and you'll see I've got this already set up on our serial port COM4, and the site data is set to our headquarters in Arkansas. That's why I selected that on Stellarium. So we've got enable serial port turned on here. We've got it selected, and we got our site data. So that's important, and the correct mount also, the IXS 100. So you hit OK.
Jerry, the rate defaults to sidereal, right?
That's right.
Don't change it.
Yeah, you don't need to change that unless you get into it a little further. Once you learn the mount and the system, then you might or might not want to change it. I never change it. There's reasons for that we can get into at another time. But so once you do that, you can hit OK and hit OK. And then let me see if I can find it here. Back here.
Now, Peter Visma says that Stellarium announced a new version yesterday.
Okay.
.20.2 is the new.
Yeah. That's the one I downloaded today, but that was my first cut at it, and I didn't see where the telescope thing was. But I think I know how to get at it now with that. But it should be similar to this if it's available. So once you get POTH, you need to start POTH up, and then you hit connect scope, and now it's connected. You can see the numbers up here on the display that shows the coordinates that the IXS 100 are pointed to. And we'll get into that tomorrow some more. So now that you've got that set up, we're selected. We got that. We can hit OK on the setup, and now when we connect, this will connect to the POTH. We got the POTH running. You saw that earlier. So I'm going to hit connect, and the status says connected now. All right. So now you can close that. I've got to get used to this interface. It's really different than what I'm used to, finding things and where things are at, and this highly graphical interface is different than.
I find those icons confusing.
Yeah, they are somewhat, but it's like anything else. You have to learn what they mean.
How to use, so.
You have to use them.
That's right. So now I'm ready to slew to an object. The interesting thing is that let me go back to the POTH. And right now you see it says 00 on here. I got to go back to the POTH. So this is not even showing you anything because if I hit slew, I think this is where that guy from France had a problem. So if I were to hit slew, I'm going to select center of screen and hit slew. It comes up with this message.
Okay.
He says, can't slew a telescope which is parked, unparked before performing. Now, there's nothing that I could find right now in Stellarium that lets you park and unpark the scope. That's why I suggest that you use the POTH. So now let's go back to the POTH and see the unpark button.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to turn tracking on. That's this selection. So now if you look at it, I don't know if you can see the numbers, but the RA is fixed in position because it's tracking the sky now. And it's at the North Celestial Pole.
Right.
But the RA axis is moving right now. So now let's go to...
Jerry, back up a second. Explain why. Get the POTH up again for me real quick. Okay, explain why, if the right ascension is moving, why aren't those numbers moving?
So
So
you're tracking the sky. So yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive. So what the right ascension is what defines the position of an object in the celestial sphere. And because the Earth is rotating from the ground, from our view, the celestial sphere is always moving. All right, so objects are moving. The RA is a fixed measurement,
Right.
all right, on the sky, but that object is moving, okay? So when you're tracking an object, you're tracking an object, that means your coordinates should not be moving. But when you're not tracking it, so I'll turn it off. Watch this. I'll turn tracking off. Now watch, see the RA is moving now? So what that means is that I'm pointing at a fixed location in the sky in altitude and azimuth, and you can see the altitude and azimuth.
So what's changing is
So
the sky
lines are moving across. Okay, you're looking straight up, and so it looks like it's reading from here up. It's reading wherever the scope is pointed as things are moving by.
Right. Things are drifting by right now. Exactly.
Right. Now I'll turn tracking back on, and the RA will be fixed now because it's tracking that object, whatever, or that coordinate, I should say. It's tracking a coordinate. All right.
So RA and DEC will be fixed, and Alt-Az will be moving, right?
Alt-Az will be moving, but right now I'm not pointed away from the pole, so I'll have to show you. So I'm going to go to the moon. I'm going to show you how I can slew the mount to the moon.
Okay.
All right. Let's see if it'll put so put the lunar coordinates in here, hours and degrees. So I'm going to hit slew.
Okay.
Now my mountain is moving, and then you'll see the cursors come from the north here. You'll see it come down. There it is.
There's our
You
scope.
see it?
Yeah.
So that's where that marks where the telescope is literally pointing.
That's right. That's a real-time position for where the telescope's pointing.
So it's awful bright in the eyepiece right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it went right by the sun.
Yeah.
Right.
That is something that to talk about just for a moment here, because if you're using planetarium software like that, okay, or at any time, let's just say this, any time that you're using a telescope in the daytime, because, and it is cool to use it during the daytime because you can find planets. You can split Castor, for example, in broad daylight, okay?
Right.
But what can also happen is that your telescope could slew right across the sun, okay? And so if you don't have covers on your telescope, a solar filter, or things capped in general, okay, once sunlight goes inside, it can do some real damage, okay? You can burn the inside of your tube. You can burn the cement between lenses of an eyepiece. They can boil in there. Or your eye could be there and that could boil. And so we don't want that.
Right. So one of the key objects, you might want to look at the moon during the daytime. You might want to look at Venus. Venus is down here.
Venus, I've seen Saturn in the daytime and Jupiter.
Yeah.
I saw Mars in the daytime one time. I saw a comet in the daytime one time. Okay. You know, and it's really cool to see stars. You can get, depending on the size of your scope, you can count up to 50 to 100 stars depending on the transparency of the full daylight sky, you know. But you do need to be careful. This is something, you know, if you've got kids around, definitely adult supervision. You need to be watching for this this part, because it is this is the danger zone. Okay, when you start or even near, you know, don't even get near the sun. You know, the intense glare off the edge of the sun is still a lot of energy coming into the scope.
I had a Schmidt Cassegrain that I lined up on the sun, and did 8-inch Schmidt that lined up on the sun. I had an old film canister that plugged the back hole where the diagonal went, or the eyepiece went
through that thing.
I was sitting there and I started smelling burning plastic and looked down, and it had melted, and it was building a puddle up already on the ground.
Oh yeah.
Oh
and
yeah.
It literally within under a second, it already melted that black plastic film canister. The other thing to remember is, don't forget about your finder scope either, because your finder scope can do just as much damage as a telescope.
That's right. That's right. Okay. We digress there for a moment for a good reason. So
yeah. So if you look here, Now at the POTH, if you look at the numbers, our RA value is fixed right now because we're on the moon.
Yeah.
But if you look at the azimuth and altitude, you can see these numbers are changing.
Yes.
Because we're see that? And now let me turn tracking off. Now watch what happens. Now the RA starts to move because we're not tracking anymore, but the altitude and azimuth are fixed right now.
That's right.
So I'm going to turn it back on, and I'm going to just slew it back to the object, which is a tiny little slew. So that's it. So you can see that the mount works. Although you didn't see physically the mount move, we'll see that. We'll show you that tomorrow when I go through the installation.
Yeah.
But I'll test it on that. See if that new version that was released the 2.20, I guess it was, or 2.02 or something, whatever he said.
20-.02, I think is what it is.
Yeah, I'll try that and see if I can see how it's configured with the AskHum driver on that.
Yeah. So Peter gave a link to it here in Facebook. So
okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
So I think let me see here. Let me get out of here. My dogs are going nuts again all of a sudden.
Right.
Actually, I thought those are your dogs. I thought that was your ringtone.
Yeah, my ringtone. Right. So I'm gonna unshare.
Yep.
And we'll see what we can do.
Okay. All right. So our next subject is going to be in general about guide scopes. There are people who want to know how to properly physically attach a guide scope to when using one of our mounts. There are people that want to know, what's the right focal length to use, camera combination. So apparently there's some rules of thumb.
Yep, that's right. There's generally just a rule of thumb is that the focal length of your main scope, let's say it's 1,000 millimeters that you're doing some deep sky work with. You want your auto guider to be at least probably a third of that, or 300 to 350 millimeters is a good value for your guide scope.
Guiding scope should be at least 350. What if it's more? What if it's longer?
It's fine if it's longer, although you'll get into some sensitivity problems. So if it's longer, you might want to bend your camera to compensate for that.
Mm-hmm.
To go bend to, so that the pixel scale, basically you want your pixel scale to be a third. That's really what it is. It's a pixel scale on your camera. It's not the focal length.
I see. So you want that star to be on what, 2x2 pixels, something like that?
Well, it could be. So if, let's say you got your main image camera is scaled to 1 arc second per pixel. Yep. Okay, so you can, in a general rule of thumb, you want your guide scope to be 3 arc seconds per pixel. Now you can do that because for PhD2 as a guide system, when it calculates the centroid of the star mass, it gets it down to like 20% of the pixel size. So you'll get 20 to 30%. So you'll get down to below 1 arc second, typically on your precision for your measurement of your centroid, and that's what it's measuring. So it looks at the current centroid, and then it measures the next one and says, okay, how much have I moved in RA and DEC? And it moves the mount to compensate for that. And that's what it's doing in real time.
I see.
With the tiny little guiding commands. And it's a fraction of a sidereal rate where it's moving it over a certain amount of time. For the PMC-8, for example, the default that I set in the AskHum driver is 40% of the sidereal rate, which is equal to 6 arc seconds per second. So that's the rate it would move when it tries to adjust and reposition the center of the star. So if it'll move it, let's say it's moved 0.2 arc seconds or 0.3 arc seconds away, then it'll calculate the amount of time to pulse it. based on that rate. So that's how it works.
So,
So
6 arc seconds per second is what again?
That's the guide rate that I have set in the PhD as the default in the AskHum driver. You could select any rate you want up to 1 arc second per second, which is the older telescope systems couldn't do fractional sidereal rate guiding.
I see.
But we in the PMC-Eight, you can got 1% resolution on that, so you can go from like 10. What am I trying to say? A fraction of 10% of sidereal rate, which would be 1.5 arc seconds per second, up to 15 arc seconds per second every 0.4.
I remember in the old days having like the old SBIG ST4 auto guide, and there was an aggressive setting that you could set on it, and
Right.
And I remembered that I was hammering it too hard. You know, I was going for a real short exposure, and I was actually chasing the seeing conditions. You know, and
Right. That's what happens. Right.
and I was taught not, you know, that I need to go for the longest exposure that I could have without introducing drift into my shot. Okay, so you know, I could go in general for about 10 seconds before I would see that. Okay, and so I set it just below 10 as far as an exposure, and I had pretty decent guiding with that. So.
Yeah, that's the way you want it, because your mount, what you're trying to compensate for is declination drift, whatever, if you don't have a perfect polar alignment, and then any periodic error. But if you've got a nice smooth mount that's got good periodic error that's smooth, it doesn't necessarily have to be down below 5 or 10 arc seconds of periodic error. It could be 20 arc seconds of periodic error. As long as it's smooth over a 5 or 10 second period, it's not going to move that much.
Right.
So you can do exposures that long and get a very good star to set your target on and calculate the centroid for. And you're filtering out the seeing because you're averaging the seeing over at least 2 seconds. So people, you typically want to guide over a 2 second or 3 second period for auto guiders. But the problem with that is that you don't correct for these little defects in your worm and wheel, which we've talked about before, that cause these little spikes in your guiding, in your tracking of your mount. And so you get images that you expose for 5 minutes or 3 minutes that have these little tick marks or spikes where the gear had a defect in it and it wasn't corrected with the auto guiding. So there's kind of a trade-off there with low-end mounts compared to high-end mounts.
Sure. Right. That's right.
All right. So Bill Black notes, longer focal length on guide scopes can make it harder to find guide stars.
That's also
yep.
It's a great point, because you can a little bit's good, a whole lot's always better, right? If a little fertilizer on your yard's good, let's put 4 times the amount, but it'll burn your grass and kill your grass. Same sort of thing. You can have too much of a good thing. And Jennifer Shelley says, Offaxis guiding can also make things more challenging. Talk about that a little bit, Jerry.
So Offaxis Guiding uses a tool called, oddly enough, an Offaxis Guider, which is basically a little attachment you can put on your camera, on your main imaging camera, and it's got a little prism that picks off light and routes it 90 degrees up so you can put your guide camera on top with your main camera on the backside. So you basically pick off light with a prism to point it up into the guide camera. And the good ones, you can move it around and steer it around and look for stars, but it's a very narrow field of view to find a star.
Yeah. Plus you're on the edge of the light cone. Okay. So you have to get a very bright star in general. Okay. The auto guider cameras, of course, work way better than the human eye did. Okay. So all my experience with Offaxis guiders were, visual, sitting there looking at a star at a crosshair with a guide control paddle in my hand, and it was like trying to play a video game. It was crazy, so certainly a CCD camera really helps on that, but nothing beats a guide scope, you know.
Right. So the difference there is that you're using the actual optic that you're imaging with the so the ratio there is 1-to-1 on your guide star. So that's why it's more difficult. You're using a long focal length to magnify your guide star and to collect it. You got more light because you got a bigger objective typically, but again, it's very long focal length, so it's even harder to find stars.
Right.
All right.
Okay. All right. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience, but about guiding. But when hooking up the auto guiders, are any tips or things that you can recommend, Jerry? I know that we have pulse guiding and.
Yeah, so there's a couple, right. So there's two ways to use an auto guiding camera. And camera manufacturers today still provide a legacy feature that was invented by SBIG, Santa Barbara Instrument Group, called the ST4 port. And they included it with their very first ST4 guiding system. And it's basically replicates a push button controller. It was the initial standard was a contact input. So it basically took direct replacement of this little hand paddle that Scott was talking about that he would push east, west, up, north, south buttons on. It's basically replicated that contact closure that you have with those simple buttons and put it in and allows the camera to generate those contact closures to feed your mount. So that's the legacy system that's still available today, that you use a ST4 cable, which is basically looks like a standard telephone cable because it's got an RJ6 connector on it. And our system, PMC-Eight, has a ST4 port to use on the system. But AskHum provides an alternative method to use the existing communications through the USB cable from the computer to send a pulse guide command directly to the mount. And the AskHum driver talks to the mount and through the pulse guide command, which is a very specific guide command that lets you set the direction and the pulse width. And then you determine so you got the pulse width that it sends, depending on how far it had to correct, plus that multiplied by the pulse rate, which is what you set in the driver. Like I was talking about before, we got it defaulted set to 40% of the sidereal rate. So you take the pulse time multiplied by the pulse rate, and that tells you how far it will move for that correction, that specific correction. So those are the two ways to set up the auto guiding system. PhD2, so on PhD2, if you want to use the legacy ST4 port, you would select on camera under the settings for the auto guiding camera. And the alternative is to select AskHum, which is pulse guiding. It uses the AskHum pulse guiding function.
So, Jerry, there's ability to capture guiding logs. Is that available if you're using onboard and going through the ST4 port?
Yeah, so you're getting, regardless of where you get the commands from, it's controlling the camera. It'll record that pulse. Whether you're pulsing it through the camera or directly through pulse guiding command, the guide log will capture that.
And that all runs through AskHum as well, correct?
Well, the guide log is built into PhD2. No, it's nothing to do with AskHum, right? It's using the AskHum information.
The guide camera goes to, you hook the guide camera up to AskHum as the POTH hub as well, right?
Yeah, right.
That's what I was asking.
Right.
The key is POTH is everything.
Yeah, so if you have multiple clients, so we want to connect up the auto guiding program, PhD2. We want to connect up the star chart program. We might have a camera control program that creates a FITS header file that includes the camera and telescope information. And also, so it needs to read the mount position also.
Sure.
So there's 3 clients right there that if you're an astrophotographer that you're going to have connected to the PMC-Eight. And that's what the purpose of the hub is.
Yep.
What else would you hook up to it?
Maybe.
Yeah, you might have some observatory, like a dome control that looks at the position of the telescope and slews, like at the MSRO, our dome looks at the position of the telescope and slaves the dome position to the telescope position, so it automatically, as your telescope tracks, it moves the dome slit where it needs to be. There may be other cameras that you have connected that use a separate program for like a finder camera. If you have a finder scope that you have an electronic imager on it that has an electronic finder for a wide field view, that's always nice to have in a remote observatory.
Right. That's right. Maybe a weather instrument or something like that. I don't know if there's.
Right, a weather instrument is another thing.
Also,
What's the weather? Is that like a trombone?
different things that are going on in an observatory situation, and to expect one client to handle absolutely everything is a little tough. I think that there might be some clients like maybe Maxim DL is handling most of that. Okay.
Yeah, Maxim, right.
But if there are little separate programs that you like that are working very well with each piece of hardware, really the answer is that you're looking at that POF, and so that's an important piece of hardware for you. And we have the only system out there with our driver system that's working also wireless. Is that right, Jerry?
Well, when we developed that, I think other companies now offer a wireless AskHum connection, but we were the first out there to offer a wireless or serial AskHum connection to our mount control. It's been 3 or 4 years ago. 4 years ago is when I developed that.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of goes into a question that Cohen Stamelon from Belgium asked a little while back. If you do that AskHum thing and want to use Stellarium, do you need to connect with a cable, or does that also work on the Wi-Fi? So tackle that one.
Yeah, so the Wi-Fi is selected in the AskHum driver. There's a selection on the AskHum driver configuration. It's not in Stellarium, it's on the AskHum driver. So when you select the connection to the PMC-Eight, you can either do it through the serial connection or through the Wi-Fi connection. It's your choice.
What do we recommend for astrophotography?
For astrophotography, we always recommend a hard cable because it's more reliable. You don't know what your wireless traffic might be from hour to hour. You might have other issues with the wireless that come up. I know we do have customers that do have reliable wireless and with the devices they're using. It depends on what device you're using to control the telescope. If it's a Windows tablet, it might be a Linux machine, but it's very dependent on the quality of your wireless board that you're using. Because we see a lot of dropouts on cheap Android tablets because of the wireless modules they use aren't that high quality. But we'll see. I've never really had a problem with my laptop, my Windows HP laptop. That's a high-dollar laptop with a high-quality wireless, controller. So your mileage may vary basically when trying to use a wireless AskHum connection. But we always, if you're going to do astrophotography and use a computer system next to the mount, then you need to go ahead and switch over to a serial connection.
Yeah.
And just any old serial cable will not work.
Well, there's two types required. One with the G11 Exos 2, you have to get computers today only have USB ports. They don't have legacy serial ports. So you need to buy a USB to serial DB9 adapter for a G11 or an Exos 2 mount with the PMC-Eight. But the Exos 100 mount has a built-in USB connection that you can just use a standard mini USB to USB-A type connection cable, which is available everywhere basically.
But the DB9 adapter needs to be a specific cable set, the FTDI chipset.
That's right.
It can't just be a generic cable.
No, we've seen problems with prolific chipsets, and it's widely reported in the industry. So FTDI is the gold standard for these USB controllers.
Could you
and they're
like that off of Amazon, for example, though? with the
$20.
it's $20.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked about this before in previous shows where you don't want to cheap out. You don't want to cheap out on a connection when you spend several $100s on stuff.
That's right.
Or thousands
Yeah.
of dollars. Don't save $8 by getting the.
Think that you bought a nice stereo system and you don't want to put, bad speaker cables to your,
Yeah.
high-end speakers. You want nice stuff. Okay, well, we are at about 40 minutes here, and we're at our last question, unless we have questions from the audience. But there was a question, I think we talked about it a little bit yesterday, where someone who had an HD Fire tablet said that things were below the horizon, that he knew were below the horizon, but the object database is showing above the horizon. And we think we found the answer that he wasn't connected to a telescope. You can download the program, you can go into the library, but if you're not connected to a telescope, it may show that things are available to slew to when in fact they wouldn't be.
Right.
Right? And so what's happening when you connect to the telescope, Jerry?
So when you connect to the telescope, I think the way it's been coded is that, well, you don't have the information on where the telescope's located, and you have the location information, which should be enough to determine whether the object is above the horizon or not to give you the slew button. But I think the default condition on the slew button is enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So after you make the connection to the telescope, the way the program works is it goes out and says, okay, I'm connected now. I know where I'm pointed at, what's available for me to look at, and then when you select an object, it says, oh, that's not available, so it does not show the slew button at that point. I haven't looked at that directly, but if that's the case, then that's what the problem is. We were thinking yesterday that there was a special case where we pointed to an object, or there was an object that showed up when we were connected to the scope, and it made it available to slew to when we knew it was below the horizon.
So how it projects is, I tested it a little while ago. You can launch the app and it will show the M objects, we'll say, and it will show the ones that are below the horizon. But if you tap on it to read about it, it shows a slew button up there. So the tablet knows it's below the horizon, but the default state, as Jerry said, is the slew button's active. The key here is it's not connected up to the mount. It's just in practice state, if you will. So you can
standalone mode.
Yeah, standalone mode.
Yeah.
But as soon as you hook up the mount, that slew to button disappears on all the things below the horizon.
Right. I think a lot of people who might be looking at our system would download the app just to kind of get a feel for what it would be all about. The better way to figure out what it's all about is to actually try it out live, and that would be the best shot at that right now is to join the Mark Slade Remote Observatory, MSRO Science, and watch how they control a G11 being operated with a PMC-8 mount, and maybe get involved in some of the science programs they have. So I'll give a shout out for those guys.
Yeah, thanks. Mm-hmm.
And
MSROscience.org is our website.
Sure. And, there's the old-fashioned way. Get out your planisphere and see what's up or down, and, that will also help. But I don't see any...
Yeah, Scott, there's one from Amy the Astro.
Yeah. Is there any way to update the database? Way back when Sirius was out of position, I tried slewing to it, and it slewed way off to some other part of the sky. Even with coordinates, it slewed way off. That doesn't sound right, Amy. Even with coordinates. So if you put in the coordinate information, it should have slewed to those coordinates. So we would need to know more about the settings that you had set into Explore Stars at the time, so that we could duplicate the problem. If you have a bug like that, we need to know your latitude, your longitude, what time, so that we can try to duplicate that stuff.
And can you duplicate it on something else as well? Mike Wiesner says scope manufacturers need to just drop the RS-232 and the driver riders need to go to USB direct. That's probably true at some point.
Well, one of the things we considered when we designed the PMC-Eight originally.
Yes, we did. We talked about this.
Yeah, we definitely. So we wanted to get a robust, this was an observatory control system. It wasn't just for portable use. We wanted to make it versatile to where we could mount it. And one of the things about that is we wanted fairly good cables. We wanted locking connectors. Locking connectors was a big thing. Now, I don't consider the little RJ little tab for the RJ connectors. That's not a locking connector. It'll keep it in there, but that can break off so easy. I don't know how many people.
They do.
You know, it's a pain in the butt.
And also wires that come down from inside those connectors. I remember helping customers because they would plug it in, and somehow when they plugged it in, maybe they went into the side a little bit, it would move one of the wires over to touch the other wire. Okay. And so then, you know, all kinds of weird things would happen. I'd have them go in with an X-Acto knife and bend those wires back. This is on LX200
right.
stuff. We had, you know, we would have people that would get cables where the that J connector wasn't exactly seated in exactly right, you know. So it's not a super reliable cable set or a super reliable connector, you know.
Right, we kind of violated that rule a little bit with the ST4 cable because the ST4 cable was designed as an RJ cable.
I know.
So we didn't want to make a special cable that people had to buy.
So
we kind of violated that rule with the ST4 cable, but again, we offer alternatives to that where you don't have to use that cable, and we don't recommend you use that cable if you have the option.
Yeah, and there was discussion, robust discussion from what I've heard about the RJ, about the ST4 port.
About that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Right. Whether it was going to be included or not.
Well, that was early on. Yeah. So originally, when I did the design, it did not include the legacy ST4 port because I thought at that time that everybody's moving to the Pulse Guide AskHum standard for doing guiding. Why would you want an extra cable? Well, I got pushed back late in the game and added that feature onto the PMC-Eight. Probably about 6 months to a year before we released it. That was late in the hardware design.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, do we see any more questions here? Amy, sounds like a loose lug nut. JK, did you check for a loose clutch? That's
that was a question from Mr. Thump 30.
Yeah. Yeah, there's things that could happen.
And she did say everything else worked fine. It worked just fine slewing to other objects, even stars right next to Ceres. That's a weird.
Oh, yeah, Amy.
So I need to look at the date. So I do the ephemeris calculation I wrote that portion of the Explore stars. So we need to know the details on your location and your time when you tried to slew to that object, and we can go and look at the calculated position for, was it Saturn or Jupiter? What was it?
Ceres opposition.
Ceres, okay. It was a minor planet Ceres, okay. There could be bad data in there for that. I got it off the a reliable website, I thought, in terms of the orbital parameters, but who knows?
What's also weird about it is that she said even when I tried to plug in the when I tried
manually put in the RA deck. Yeah.
Oh, that's something that we need to.
Yeah, that's something else.
Yeah.
So Jerry, give her your email address so she can send it to you.
It's jrh@explorescientific.com.
Wait a minute, you just gave out your email address publicly so anyone can contact you?
Yeah, that's what the company email address is for, right?
You mean we can be contacted easily? Wow.
I think so. I get lots of customers almost every day.
My private mobile number out there regularly, so
Yeah,
Yeah.
that impresses me about Scott. He puts his mobile phone number to everybody. I'm surprised he doesn't get a bunch of spam every day.
I do. I do get spam every day. Yeah.
It's out there on Facebook. I know it's on
Yeah. So
Facebook multiple times.
first thing I ask people to do if they're really, they want to talk to me is to text me first. So then I know it's not like someone trying to sell me financing or something like that. So
It's probably best just to text you their phone number so you can call them back.
yeah, I put these people in my phone book though. If you're a customer, I put you in the phone book. That way you can
Yeah.
come in next time. So anyhow, we really appreciate you guys watching the show. We'll be on tomorrow. Jerry will show, you're going to, I guess, be operating our IXOS 100 remotely, okay?
Yeah.
But controlled with Stellarium, which will be exciting. And we'll have more questions and answers for you, maybe some astrophotography stuff. I think on Thursday or Friday, Robert Weiss is going to join us. He's been shooting a lot of deep sky stuff. He's been getting really good skies recently, and he showed me some beautiful shots around Cygnus with his ED-102 and his G11 running PMC-Eight. So very
He's
awesome.
adding more data tonight.
Yeah.
He says he's going to get good viewing again tonight.
Yeah.
I've got one last thing. I talked to Chris Moses before this broadcast, and he'd like to come on next week on Wednesday to talk about the configuration manager. He's working on a new release of to correct some things and to add some features that we talked about last week, I think, or week before last maybe. But he'd like to come on next Wednesday. I don't know if he's he typically watches these broadcasts. I don't know if he's in the Facebook chat, but I just announced it, Chris, if you're on there. So now you have to come on Wednesday.
Right.
Next Wednesday.
All right. Okay. So we will we'll see all of you tomorrow at 4 Central. Take care and keep looking up. Bye-bye.